Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the wild, candlelit world of medieval dating, where love was less about swiping right and more about dodging plague, priests, and some truly unhinged advice. Picture yourself in a muddy village square, the air thick with wood smoke and the faint whiff of livestock, as a troubadour strums a lute and sings about unrequited love for a lady who probably doesn't know he exists. You're surrounded by folks who think a good date involves a communal bath and a prayer to avoid eternal damnation. Spoiler: you probably won't survive this without questioning every rom-com you've ever seen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a 14th century European hamlet where finding a partner feels like a high-stakes game of survival. The mainstream fact here is that medieval courtship was heavily tied to social class. Nobles had arranged marriages for alliances, while peasants often had more freedom but faced economic pressures to pair up fast. If you're a peasant, you're eyeing someone at the village fair, hoping they've got a decent pig or two to sweeten the deal. But here's where it gets weird. One bizarre piece of advice from the time suggested wearing a charm made of dried herbs and, yes, animal dung to attract a lover. Apparently the stench was supposed to scream marriage material. You're skeptical, but half the village swears by it, claiming it's an ancient secret passed down by wise women. Historians still argue whether these charms were genuine folk magic or just medieval snake oil peddled to desperate singles. You weave through the crowd, dodging a merchant hawking love apples, fruits soaked in questionable potions. The logic? Hand one to your crush and they'll fall for you. Sounds romantic until you realize the apple's probably laced with enough herbs to knock out a horse. You spot a young man trying this trick, nervously offering a shiny apple to a woman who looks more confused than charmed. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine explaining that move on a modern dating profile. The village buzzes with other odd tips. Some say whispering a lover's name to a toad under a full moon seals their heart to yours. You're not sure if it's sweet or just amphibian harassment. Either way, the locals take it seriously, and you're half tempted to try it just to see if it works. But it's not all quirky charms and fruit-based seduction. Courtship here is a minefield of rules. If you're a woman, you're expected to play coy, maybe drop a handkerchief for a suitor to pick up. Medieval flirting 101. Men, meanwhile, have to navigate a maze of social cues without accidentally offending someone's dad, who might own the only plough in town. One wrong move, and you're not just single, you're exiled to the next village. You notice a group of young women giggling over a love knot, a braided cord meant to bind two hearts. It's cute until you learn it's tied with sheep gut. Romance, medieval style, is equal parts hope and hygiene nightmare. As you wander, you overhear a grizzled matchmaker doling out advice. Never caught on a Tuesday, it's cursed. You roll your eyes, but the crowd nods solemnly. Superstition rules this world, and love is no exception. You can't help but laugh at the thought of checking your horoscope before asking someone out. Yet, there's a charm to this chaos. People genuinely believed they could nudge fate with a bit of weirdness. You're starting to see why, in a world of short lifespans and shorter tempers, maybe a dung charm or a moonlit toad was the best shot at love. You move deeper into the village, wondering what other bizarre tricks await. You're still in this muddy medieval village, the air now tinged with the sharp scent of boiling herbs as you stumble upon a rickety stall where an old woman stirs a bubbling cauldron. She's brewing love potions, and you're about to learn just how far medieval folks went to spark romance. The mainstream fact is that alchemy and herbalism was serious business in the Middle Ages. People relied on apothecaries for everything from curing fevers to, apparently, winning hearts. But the quirky tidbit? Some recipes called for ingredients like dove hearts or mandrake root, believed to ignite passion, but more likely to cause a stomachache. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were placebos or if folks genuinely felt their effects, maybe because desperation is a powerful drug. You lean closer, watching the woman toss in a handful of dried rose petals and what looks suspiciously like a frog's foot. She mutters about binding souls while stirring, her eyes glinting with either wisdom or a good sales pitch. You're told to drink this sludgy mix under a waxing moon to make your crush swoon. You imagine the taste, bitter, earthy, with a hint of regret, and decide you'd rather stay single. The crowd around you, though, is all in, whispering about a local lad who supposedly won his bride with a similar brew. You're skeptical, but you can't help chuckling at the thought of a medieval Tinder bio boasting master of potion making, the stalls cluttered with vials labelled in shaky script, elixir of ardent desire, tincture of true affection. One claims to use powdered stag antler for extra potency. You wince, picturing the poor stag, and the even poorer fool who drinks it. Yet the logic wasn't entirely bonkers. Medieval folks believed the natural world held mystical powers, so why not borrow a bit of animal magic for love? You spot a young woman buying a vial, her cheeks flushing as she hides it in her cloak. You want to warn her it's probably just spicy mud, but she's already dreaming of her happily ever after. Then there's the darker side. Some potions veered into witchcraft territory. You hear whispers of women accused of using charms to ensnare men, landing them in hot water with the church. One infamous case involved a noblewoman who allegedly dosed her suitor with a mix of wine and toad venom, romance or attempted murder, depending on who you ask. You laugh quietly, imagining her defense. "I just wanted him to like me." The church wasn't amused, often branding such practices as heresy. You're starting to see why love potions were a risky move. Get the recipe wrong, and you're either lovesick or on trial. As you move away from the stall, you notice a group of teens giggling over a spell to make someone dream of you. It involves chanting their name while burning a lock of their hair. Creepy? Sure. But in a world without dating apps, maybe creeping was the only option. You shake your head, amused at the lengths people went to for a spark. The old woman calls after you, offering a discount on a potion for eternal devotion. You politely decline, but you can't help feeling a twinge of curiosity. What if it worked? You push the thought aside, dodging a cart of cabbages as you head toward the next bizarre chapter of medieval romance. You're weaving through the bustling medieval village now, the clank of armor catching your ear as a knight struts by, his polished breastplate gleaming under the midday sun. You're about to dive into the peculiar world of chivalry, where love was less about candlelit dinners and more about swearing oaths on your sword. The mainstream fact is that chivalry, born in the 12th century, was a knightly code, blending honor, loyalty, and idealized romance, often tied to serving a noble lady. But the quirky tidbit: knights were advised to wear their lady's scarf, or, weirder still, her glove, tucked into their armor during battle, to channel her love. Historians still argue whether this was genuine devotion or just performative nonsense to impress the court. You pause near a tournament field where two knights are jousting, lances splintering as the crowd roars. One flashes a tattered ribbon tied to his arm, supposedly a token from his beloved. You can't help but snicker. Imagine explaining to your date that you need her scarf to survive a lance to the chest. The idea was that her favor gave him strength, but you're betting it just made him smell like lavender while getting concussed. Chivalry demanded knights treat love like a sacred quest, but the rules were absurdly specific. You're told a proper knight must pine dramatically, write poetry, and never ever look too happy. Melancholy was the brand. You wander closer to the stands where noble women wave delicately, their faces half hidden by veils. A knight's supposed to dedicate his victories to his lady, but you overhear one muttering he's just in it for the prize money. You chuckle. Medieval dating had its share of posers too. The code of chivalry also meant knights couldn't just ask someone out. They had to prove their worth through deeds, like slaying a rival or rescuing her from, well, probably nothing, since most damsels weren't actually in distress. You picture a knight showing up with a dead boar as a first date gift. Romantic? Maybe if you like pork. The absurdity doesn't stop there. Some manuals, like Andreas Capellanus's The Art of Courtly Love, advised knights to faint dramatically if their lady so much as glanced at them. You try to imagine pulling that off without looking like you tripped over your own ego. Yet, these rules weren't just for show. Chivalry shaped how nobles approached love, turning it into a public spectacle. A knight might spend years serving a lady he barely knew, writing odes to her eyebrows while she was married to someone else. You're starting to think modern ghosting isn't so bad. As you leave the tournament, you spot a young squire practicing his lovesick gaze in a puddle's reflection. You bite back a laugh. He's clearly read one too many chivalric manuals. But there's a strange charm to this world where love was a performance, equal parts noble and ridiculous. You wonder if that knight's scarf really kept him safe or just got sweaty under all that armor. Shaking your head, you move toward the village square, where the next chapter of medieval romance awaits, probably with even weirder stakes. You're back in the heart of the medieval village, the air now thick with the chatter of deals being struck as you find yourself amid a chaotic scene that feels like a cross between a livestock auction and a reality TV show. You're stepping into the marriage market where love takes a backseat to land, dowries, and who's got the best goats. The mainstream fact is that medieval marriages, especially among the upper classes, were strategic alliances, often arranged by parents to secure wealth or political ties. Romance was a bonus, not a requirement. But the quirky tidbit, some deals hinged on bizarre clauses like promising a bride's family a barrel of eels or a trained falcon. Historians still argue whether these odd dowry items were symbolic or just medieval haggling gone wild. You stand by a wooden platform where a merchant is loudly negotiating his daughter's betrothal, gesturing to a cart piled with wool as if it's a PowerPoint slide. The groom's father counters with an offer of 2 cows and a patch of swampy land. You can't help but smirk. Imagine proposing with a PowerPoint titled, "Why My Cows Are a Steal." The bride, draped in a stiff gown, looks like she'd rather be anywhere else, and you don't blame her. Marriage here isn't about candlelit confessions, it's a contract, sealed with handshakes and suspicious glances. You overhear someone whisper that the bride's dowry includes a cursed meadow. Good luck unloading that on Zillow. Wandering through the crowd, you notice peasants have their own version of this chaos. A farmer's son is eyeing a girl whose family owns a sturdy plough. True love or equipment envy? You chuckle at the thought of a medieval prenup listing one rusty scythe as a deal-breaker. For peasants, marriage was less about alliances and more about survival. 2 sets of hands meant better odds against famine. Still, the haggling could get intense. One couple's match is nearly derailed when the groom's family demands an extra piglet. You're starting to see why romantic getaway meant a quick prayer at the local shrine. The weirdest part? Some markets had bride shows where eligible women were paraded like prize livestock. You spot a group of nervous young women, their hair braided with flowers, standing before a crowd of appraising suitors. It's less The Bachelor and more Antiques Roadshow, with fathers boasting about their daughters' spinning skills or childbearing hips. You wince, grateful for modern dating apps, even with their own baggage. Yet there's a grim logic to it. In a world where winter could wipe out half the village, a good match was life or death. As you move away from the platform, you overhear a matchmaker bragging about sealing a deal with a love charm thrown in for free, probably that dung amulet from earlier. You shake your head, amused at how even cold transactions got dressed up in superstition. The market buzzes on, deals struck, hearts ignored, and you can't help but feel a mix of pity and awe for these folks navigating love like a high-stakes flea market. You head toward quieter streets, curious about what other romantic oddities this world has in store. You've slipped away from the noisy marriage market, finding yourself in a quieter corner of the medieval village where the air hums with whispered poetry and the faint strum of a lute. You're about to unravel the strange world of courtly love, a medieval trend that sounds romantic, but often feels like obsession with extra steps. The mainstream fact is that courtly love, popularized in the 12th century by poets like Chrétien de Troyes, was a formalized system where knights pledged undying devotion to noble ladies, often without expecting actual romance. The quirky tidbit? Some knights took it so seriously they'd sleep outside their lady's window to prove their love. Today, we'd call that a restraining order. Historians still argue whether courtly love was a literary ideal or a real-life practice that just got out of hand. You're standing near a castle's garden where a knight kneels before a lady, reciting a poem about her eyes like starlit pools. You bite back a laugh. His earnestness is sweet, but it's hard to take seriously when his armor's creaking like a rusty gate. Courtly love demanded knights worship their ladies from afar, often married women, with zero chance of reciprocation. You imagine the knight's diary. Day 47, still no reply to my sonnet. Maybe she didn't like the part about her eyebrows. The lady, meanwhile, looks bored, fanning herself with a silk glove. You can't blame her. Being a muse sounds exhausting. The rules here are wild. A knight might dedicate years to serving his lady, doing absurd tasks like fighting in tournaments or fetching rare flowers from bandit-infested forests. You overhear a squire bragging about his master's latest stunt, climbing a cliff to get a feather for his beloved's hat. You chuckle, picturing him slipping on moss while muttering, "This better get me a smile." The catch? Courtly love wasn't about marriage or even dating. It was a performance, a way to flex honor and poetic skills. Some say it was empowering for women, giving them control over their suitors. Others call it glorified stalking. You're leaning toward the latter when you see a knight sigh dramatically at a window, clearly hoping for a glance. Then there's the scandal factor. Courtly love could spark gossip faster than a modern tabloid. You hear whispers about a noblewoman whose knightly admirer wrote poems so steamy they got him banished. You grin, imagining the medieval equivalent of a spicy DM getting leaked. The church wasn't thrilled either, preaching that such devotion bordered on idolatry. Yet the poetry kept flowing, reams of parchment filled with odes to unattainable ladies. You wonder if these knights ever got tired of pining or if the drama was the point. As you leave the garden, you spot a young troubadour practicing his lines, tripping over thine radiant visage like it's his first open mic. You shake your head, amused at how courtly love turned romance into a high-stakes art project. It's absurd, but there's a dreamy charm to it, like a love song no one expected to be real. You wander toward the village's rougher edges, curious about how the less poetic folks handled their flirtations. You've left the polished world of courtly love behind, trading castle gardens for the earthy chaos of the village's working-class lanes, where the air smells of fresh bread and slightly questionable ale. You're now among the peasants, where flirting doesn't involve poetry or fainting knights, but rather some of the cringiest pickup lines in history. The mainstream fact is that peasant marriages in medieval Europe were often practical, driven by the need to share labor and resources, with courtship happening at communal events like harvest festivals. The quirky tidbit? Some peasants believed rubbing a turnip on their hands before approaching a crush would make them irresistible. Spoiler, it just made them smell like soup. Historians still argue whether these odd rituals were heartfelt traditions or just desperate attempts to stand out in a crowd. You're at a lively barn dance, where fiddles screech and folks stomp in time, their boots kicking up dust. A lanky farmer's son sidles up to a girl, grinning as he says, "Your eyes shine brighter than my best cow's coat." You wince, half expecting her to toss her ale at him, but she giggles, clearly charmed. You can't help but laugh. Modern dating apps could learn a thing or two from that confidence. Peasant flirting was blunt, often tied to daily life. Another guy tries, "Marry me and we'll plough the finest fields." It's less romantic than it is a job offer, but in a world where a good harvest meant survival, maybe that's the ultimate flex. The scene's chaotic, with young men and women weaving through dances, trying to catch each other's eye. You overhear a girl whisper to her friend about a love charm she slipped into a boy's bread, a crumbly mix of herbs and, yes, a pinch of that infamous dung from earlier. You chuckle, wondering if she's aiming for love or food poisoning? These folks didn't have troubadours or fancy scrolls. Their flirtations were raw, often shouted over the din of a feast. One bold lad offers a girl a carved wooden spoon, claiming it's bewitched for love. You're skeptical, but she blushes, tucking it into her apron. Maybe there's magic in the effort, if not the spoon. The church loomed large here too, warning against lewd behavior at these gatherings. You hear a priest grumbling nearby, eyeing the dancers like they're one step from eternal flames. Yet the peasants didn't care much for sermons when ale was flowing. Some lines were straight up scandalous for the time, like a guy boasting he'd steal a kiss under the harvest moon. You grin, imagining the priest clutching his cross at that one. Still, these moments were fleeting. Most matches were sealed by parents, not passion. So a good line was a rare chance to spark something real. As you move through the crowd, you spot a shy couple exchanging a woven straw ring, a peasant version of a love token. It's sweet, even if it smells faintly of barn. You're starting to see the charm in their unpolished ways. Less poetry, more heart, and a lot more turnips. Laughing softly, you head toward the village's edge, where the church's shadow looms, ready to explore how it meddled in matters of the heart. You've wandered from the lively barn dance to the shadow of the village church, its stone walls looming like a stern parent over the revelry. The air carries the faint scent of incense and wax, and you're about to discover how the medieval church played love police, shutting down romance with a zeal that makes modern dating apps seem chill. The mainstream fact is that the Catholic Church in medieval Europe had a tight grip on marriage, declaring it a sacrament by the 12th century and setting strict rules on who could love whom. The quirky tidbit: some priests advised couples to avoid kissing before marriage because it might stir sinful humors. Basically, they thought a smooch could send you straight to hell. Historians still argue whether these bans were about spiritual control or just the church flexing its power over every aspect of life. You're standing outside the church, where a red-faced priest is lecturing a young couple for holding hands during Sunday Mass. You can't help but smirk. Imagine getting a sermon for a pinky graze. The church had a laundry list of no-nos: no marrying your cousin, fair; no marrying on certain holy days, annoying; and definitely no flirting without a chaperone. You overhear the priest warn that unseemly glances could invite demonic temptation. You chuckle, picturing a demon popping up because someone batted their eyelashes. Yet the couple looks terrified, promising to keep their eyes on the ground. Love here feels like navigating a minefield with a Bible as your map. The church's rules didn't stop at public scoldings. You learn about bans of marriage, where couples had to announce their engagement weeks in advance, giving anyone, nosy neighbors, jealous exes, a chance to object. You imagine the village gossip mill churning. "Oh, you're marrying her? I saw her drop a turnip last week, bad omen." One wrong rumor and your wedding's off. The church also frowned on anything too passionate, preaching that love should be orderly and aimed at procreation, not pleasure. You laugh quietly, thinking of that poor farmer's son from the dance, his cow-themed pickup line probably earning him a penance. Then there's the weirder stuff. Some clergy claimed certain days were cursed for romance. Wednesday was bad luck, thanks to some obscure saint's feast. You spot a nervous groom-to-be asking a monk if Friday's safe for a proposal. The monk's vague reply about consulting the stars feels like a medieval dodge. You're starting to see why villagers leaned on those dung charms and toad spells. With the church breathing down their necks, they needed all the help they could get. Still, some defied the rules, sneaking kisses behind haystacks, only to face public shaming or worse, fines paid in precious grain. As you move away from the church, you notice a young woman slipping a prayer note into a wall crack, likely begging for divine approval of her crush. It's sweet but sad, a reminder that love was a battlefield of faith and fear. You shake your head, amused at how even a glance could spark a sermon. The village hums beyond, and you're curious about how the fancy folks up in the castles handled their own romantic disasters. You've left the church's judgmental shadow behind, climbing a winding path to a grand castle perched on a hill, its banners flapping in the breeze like gossip made visible. You're stepping into the world of royal matchmaking, where love was less about heart flutters and more about forging empires, often with hilariously disastrous results. The mainstream fact is that medieval royal marriages were high-stakes diplomacy, arranged to secure alliances or end wars, with brides as young as 12 sent across continents. The quirky tidbit? Some betrothals included bizarre gifts, like a caged bear or a chest of pickled fish, meant to seal the deal but probably just confused everyone. Historians still argue whether these odd gifts were symbolic gestures or desperate attempts to sweeten bad matches. You're in the castle's great hall, where tapestries of unicorns and battles line the walls, and a nervous young princess fidgets in a velvet gown. Her betrothed, a prince from a rival kingdom, is late, his ship delayed by a storm, or maybe he's just dreading the whole thing. You can't help but chuckle, imagining his Tinder profile. Love's long voyages, hates my future wife. The king, pacing nearby, boasts about the dowry, 3 castles and a crate of rare spices. You wonder if the princess feels like a bonus prize in a medieval PowerPoint pitch. Arranged marriages were a gamble. Sometimes they sparked peace, other times, well, disaster. Take the case of a 14th century French princess wed to a prince who turned out to be more interested in his hunting dogs than her. The court gossiped for years about their awkward feasts where he'd feed his hounds before her. You grin, picturing her rolling her eyes as a dog gets the best cut of venison. Another fiasco involved a German duke who sent a portrait of his beautiful daughter to seal a betrothal, only for the groom to discover she had a beard longer than his. No refunds on that alliance. These mismatches weren't just personal, they could spark wars or bankrupt kingdoms. You're starting to see why diplomats needed a strong stomach. The weirdest part? Some royals tried to rig the game with proxy weddings, where stand-ins said the vows. You overhear a courtier joking about a proxy groom who got too drunk and married the wrong bride. You laugh softly, imagining the fallout. Sorry, Your Majesty, I thought she was the other princess. Superstition crept in too. Some royals refused to wed if a raven crossed their path on the big day. You spot a nervous advisor scanning the skies, muttering about omens. It's absurd, but in a world where a bad match could mean losing a crown, maybe a raven was worth worrying about. As you leave the hall, you see the princess glance at a locket, maybe holding a sketch of someone she actually loves. It's a fleeting moment of heart in this cold Game of Thrones. You shake your head, amused at how even kings couldn't avoid romantic train wrecks. The castle fades behind you as you head back to the village, curious about the bizarre beauty tricks medieval folks used to catch a suitor's eye. You're back in the bustling medieval village, the air now tinged with the sharp tang of vinegar and crushed herbs as you wander past a row of thatched cottages. You're about to dive into the wild world of medieval beauty hacks where looking alluring meant risking your health, your dignity, and possibly your eyebrows. The mainstream fact is that medieval beauty standards, especially for women, emphasized pale skin, rosy cheeks, and long hair, driven by ideals of nobility and purity found in art and literature. The quirky tidbit? Some women used a face mask made of ground lily root and donkey milk, believing it gave them a glowing complexion, though it more likely gave them a rash. Historians still argue whether these beauty rituals were widespread or mostly a noblewoman's obsession, exaggerated by later chroniclers. You pause outside a cottage where a young woman sits diligently applying a paste to her face that smells like a mix of sour milk and regret. She's aiming for that coveted pale look, a sign you're rich enough to avoid toiling in the sun. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine swapping your SPF for a donkey milk smoothie. The recipe comes from a beauty manual passed down by some long-dead wise woman, promising to make you irresistible. You're skeptical, especially when you notice her wincing as the paste stings. Nearby, her friend is brushing her hair with a comb dipped in rosewater, another trick teeth make it shine. It's sweet until you realize the comb's probably shared with the family goat. The beauty game wasn't just weird, it was dangerous. You overhear a merchant hawking white lead powder, guaranteed to give you that ghostly glow. You wince, knowing lead poisoning was a slow, medieval killer, turning skin grey before it turned you dead. Yet, noble women slathered it on, chasing a look that screamed, "I don't plough fields." One infamous case involved a countess who went blind from her lead-based makeup, yet still dictated beauty tips from her deathbed. You laugh softly, picturing her like a medieval influencer, undeterred by her own cautionary tale. Even peasants weren't immune, using cheaper hacks like rubbing beet juice on their cheeks for a blush. Cute, until it's stained like a crime scene. Then there's the hair obsession. You spot a girl braiding her locks with ribbons, aiming for the floor-length ideals sung about by troubadours. Some women slept with their hair tied to bedposts to train it to grow longer. You grin, imagining the neck cramps and the inevitable bedhead. Men weren't off the hook either. Beards were styled with wax that smelled like rancid fat, meant to signal virility. You catch a whiff of one guy's beard and decide single life might be fine. Superstition crept in too. Cutting hair during a new moon was thought to curse your love life. You shake your head, amused at the thought of scheduling a trim around lunar phases. As you move on, you see a woman dabbing her wrists with a love perfume made of lavender and, yes, a hint of that dung charm from earlier. It's absurd, but there's a scrappy charm to their efforts, risking rashes and lead for a shot at love. You wander toward the village square, curious about the scandalous letters that set medieval hearts racing. You're weaving through the medieval village again, the evening air now soft with the glow of flickering torches as you slip into a quieter alley where secrets seem to linger. You're about to uncover the steamy world of medieval love letters where ink and parchment sparked romances and scandals that could shake a kingdom. The mainstream fact is that letter writing was a key way for medieval nobles to communicate affection, especially in courtly love, with carefully crafted words meant to flatter and seduce. The quirky tidbit? Some lovers hid their messages inside hollowed-out apples or sewn into cloak linings to dodge prying eyes. Historians still argue whether these letters were genuine expressions of passion or just poetic flexes meant to impress a wider audience. You're standing near a scribe's stall where a young noblewoman dictates a letter to her distant suitor, her voice low but trembling with feeling. The scribe, scratching away with a quill, adds flourishes like "thy radiant virtue" that make you smirk. Medieval ghostwriting was clearly a vibe. The letters full of metaphors comparing her lover to a falcon soaring above the mundane world. You can't help but chuckle, imagining her suitor reading this and wondering if he's supposed to send a bird pun back. These letters were high art, often read aloud at court, turning private feelings into public spectacle. You picture the noblewoman's rivals rolling their eyes as her ode to his lion-like heart echoes through the hall. But not all letters were so lofty. You hear whispers of a scandalous missive that nearly toppled a baron's household. A knight sent his lord's wife a letter so spicy, hinting at stolen kisses in the chapel, that it got intercepted by a nosy servant. The fallout, public shaming, and a duel that left the knight with a limp. You grin, thinking of it as medieval DMS gone viral. Secrecy was key, hence the apple trick or hiding notes in hollow rosary beads. One story tells of a lady who accidentally sent her love letter to her husband instead of her lover. You laugh softly, imagining the awkward dinner that followed. The church, predictably, had opinions. Priests warned that lascivious letters could damn your soul, especially if they strayed into lustful territory. You spot a monk nearby, eyeing the scribe's stall like he's ready to confiscate every quill. Yet the letters kept flowing, some preserved in dusty archives, revealing raw emotion beneath the flowery prose. A peasant girl, rare for her literacy, once wrote to her betrothed about dreaming of their future farm. Simple, but it hits harder than any falcon metaphor. You're struck by how these words, scratched on fragile parchment, carried hopes across miles and class divides. As you leave the alley, you see a messenger tucking a sealed letter into his satchel, probably bound for a far-off castle. You wonder if it's a declaration of love or a scandal waiting to explode. The village hums around you, and you're curious about the knights who took their romantic quests to absurd, sword-swinging extremes. You're trudging along a dusty medieval road, the clink of armor and snort of horses filling the air as you join a band of knights setting out on what they call a romantic quest. You're about to see chivalry taken to its most absurd extremes, where love means less about cozy dates and more about battling bandits or chasing mythical beasts for a lady's favor. The mainstream fact is that by the 13th century, chivalric quests were a cornerstone of knighthood, blending martial prowess with devotion to a chosen lady, often inspired by Arthurian legends. The quirky tidbit: some knights swore to wear a single glove or a lock of their lady's hair into battle, believing it made them invincible, though it mostly made them look like they lost a bet. Historians still argue whether these quests were heartfelt acts of love or publicity stunts to boost a knight's reputation. You're riding alongside a knight named Sir Roland, who's proudly waving a tattered ribbon tied to his lance, a gift from his lady back at court. He claims it'll protect him from arrows, but you're betting it's just a sweaty piece of silk by now. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine posting, "Survived a joust thanks to my girlfriend's scrunchie" on social media. Roland's quest is to slay a rogue wolf terrorizing a village, all to prove his devotion. You're skeptical, especially when he admits he's never seen a wolf, and his training was mostly posing for troubadour ballads. Still, he's got heart, and the villagers cheering him on seem to buy the hype. These quests could get downright bizarre. You hear about a knight who vowed to walk barefoot to a shrine 100 miles away because his lady said his boots were tacky. You laugh, picturing his blistered feet and her smirking at the castle. Another swore to capture a live eagle for his beloved's menagerie, only to get pecked into retreat. The point wasn't always success. Failure made for better stories, sung by minstrels to swooning crowds. You spot a bard nearby, strumming a lute and spinning Roland's wolf hunt into an epic before it's even started. You're starting to see why knights leaned into the drama. Fame was as good as love. But it wasn't all glory. Quests were dangerous. Bandits, wild animals, or just bad weather could end you. You overhear Roland muttering about a rival knight who drowned chasing a sacred stag across a river. You wince, wondering if his lady at least sent flowers. The church had mixed feelings, praising quests for piety, but warning against vainglory if the knight got too cocky. Roland, though, is all in, adjusting his glove token like it's a lucky charm. You shake your head, amused at his mix of bravado and blind faith. As the road stretches on, you see Roland scan the forest, probably hoping his wolf shows up before his courage runs out. There's a strange nobility to it, risking life for a ribbon and a song. You turn back toward the village, curious about the forbidden loves that defied all these rules and quests. You're slipping through the twilight shadows of the medieval village, where the glow of hearth fires barely reaches the narrow alleys and whispers of forbidden love hum like a secret pulse. You're about to uncover the clandestine affairs that defied the church, class, and common sense, risking everything for a stolen glance or a hidden kiss. The mainstream fact is that medieval society was rigid, with strict rules on who could love whom, enforced by family, church, and feudal hierarchy. Crossing those lines could mean disgrace or worse. The quirky tidbit: lovers sometimes used secret codes like tying specific knots in a rope left at a window to signal a rendezvous without tipping off nosy neighbors. Historians still argue whether these illicit romances were as common as ballads suggest, or if they were romanticized tales spun to thrill audiences. You can't help but grin. Imagine texting, "Meet me at midnight," with literal string. Their eyes dart nervously. If caught, she'd be locked in her father's house, and he'd be lucky to keep his job or his head. Forbidden love wasn't just a scandal, it was a rebellion. Class divides were brutal. A noblewoman loving a peasant was as unthinkable as a pig marrying a prince. You recall a tale of a lord's daughter who ran off with a blacksmith only to be dragged back and married to a decrepit baron. You chuckle softly, picturing her muttering, "At least the blacksmith's forge was warm." The church made things trickier, branding unsanctioned love as sin. You hear about a couple excommunicated for meeting in a chapel's crypt. Romantic, until you consider the cobwebs and eternal damnation. You laugh, imagining their defense, but the candles were so flattering. Some lovers got creative, using go-betweens like maids or monks to pass messages. One story tells of a nun smuggling love notes in her prayer book, risking her vows for a friend's affair. You're impressed by the hustle, but the stakes were high. Court lovers could face public shaming, like standing in the village square wearing a sinner sign. You wince, grateful for modern privacy, even if it comes with its own drama. Superstition added another layer. Some believed a lover's curse could doom a forbidden match, like a jilted suitor hexing a rival with bad crops. You overhear a woman muttering about a charm to bind her secret bow, probably that dung amulet making a comeback. You shake your head, amused at how love made even skeptics dabble in magic. These affairs, though, weren't all tragedy. Some couples fled to distant towns, starting new lives under fake names. You admire their guts, even if their odds were slimmer than a candle in a storm. As you creep away from the haystack, you see the couple vanish into the night, their knotted cord dangling like a promise. There's a reckless beauty to their defiance, a spark that outshines the village's rules. You head toward the square, curious about the chaotic wedding rituals that tried to tame love into something orderly. You're back in the heart of the medieval village, the air now buzzing with laughter, and the clatter of wooden mugs as you stumble into a raucous wedding celebration that feels like a mix of sacred ritual and unhinged street party. You're about to witness the wild, often absurd traditions that turned medieval nuptials into a spectacle of chaos and superstition. The mainstream fact is that medieval weddings were community affairs, blending Christian rites with local customs, and often lasted days, with feasting and ceremonies to cement social bonds. The quirky tidbit? Some couples had to leap over a broom tied with nettles to seal their union, a ritual thought to ward off evil spirits, but more likely to leave them with itchy shins. Historians still argue whether these odd customs were deeply spiritual, or just excuses to get drunk and rowdy. You're standing in a crowded village square, where a bride and groom, decked in garlands of wilted flowers, are being paraded on a cart pulled by giggling neighbors. The bride's veil keeps slipping and you can't help but chuckle. Imagine trying to look regal while bouncing past a pigpen. The ceremony started at the church, where vows were swapped under the priest's hawkish gaze, but now it's a free-for-all. Someone shoves a mug of ale into your hand and you're swept into a dance that's more stumbling than graceful. The crowd chants for the couple to kiss, but tradition demands they do it while balancing a loaf of bread on their heads. You laugh, picturing the crumbs raining down like awkward confetti. The rituals get weirder. You hear about a custom where the groom's friends kidnap the bride, hiding her until he pays a ransom, usually more ale or a sheep. You spot a group of lads plotting this, their grins suggesting they're in it for the booze. You're starting to see why weddings were a village's Super Bowl, with everyone milking the chaos. Another tradition involves tying bells to the couple's bedframe to encourage fertility. You wince, imagining the newlyweds' first night soundtracked by a jangling orchestra. Superstition runs rampant too. Spilling wine during the feast is said to curse the marriage. You notice a server carefully pouring, like he's defusing a bomb. Then there's the bedding ceremony, where the couple is escorted to their chamber by a tipsy mob shouting advice that's definitely not PG-13. You overhear a grandmother yelling about warming the sheets with devotion, and you grin, grateful for modern boundaries. Some weddings even had a flouncing, where guests tossed grain at the couple for luck, less romantic when it gets in your eyes. You recall a tale of a noble wedding where the flouncing got so wild, the bride's headdress caught fire from a nearby torch. You shake your head, amused at how love was celebrated with equal parts faith and friendly assault. As the feast winds down, you see the couple sneak a quiet moment, sharing a piece of honeyed bread. It's a flicker of tenderness amid the madness, a reminder that even chaotic rituals were about hope. You slip away from the square, ready to explore how the stars themselves guided medieval hearts. You're standing on the outskirts of the medieval village, the night sky sprawling above like a tapestry of stars, their faint glow casting a dreamy haze over the thatched roofs. You're about to dive into the celestial obsession that guided medieval romance, where astrology wasn't just a horoscope app, but a life-or-death manual for love. The mainstream fact is that astrology was deeply woven into medieval life, with scholars and commoners alike consulting the stars for decisions, including marriage and courtship, believing celestial alignments shaped fate. The quirky tidbit? Some lovers refused to propose unless Venus was in a favorable house, leading to awkward delays if the planet was being astrologically stubborn. Historians still argue whether these starry-eyed choices were driven by genuine belief or just a handy excuse to dodge bad matches. You're lingering near a rickety tower where an astrologer, draped in a cloak that smells faintly of mildew, is charting a couple's compatibility by candlelight. He's muttering about Mars squaring Jupiter, warning the nervous groom-to-be that his wedding date might anger the heavens. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine ghosting your fiancé because Saturn's in retrograde. The couple hands over a precious coin for a scroll detailing their auspicious days for love. You peek at the parchment, half expecting it to say, "Try again when the moon's less moody." Astrology was serious business. Nobles hired court astrologers, while peasants begged local wise women to read the stars for a cheaper rate. The obsession went beyond timing. You overhear a woman at the market boasting that her betrothed was born under Leo, making him fiery and destined for passion. You grin, thinking it's less about destiny and more about him owning 2 goats and a decent cart. Some believed your star sign dictated your ideal partner, Virgos with Capricorns, never with Geminis, or chaos would ensue. You laugh softly, picturing a medieval dating app filtering matches by zodiac. One bizarre practice involved lovers exchanging star charms, bits of metal etched with constellations, worn to align their hearts with the cosmos. You spot a girl clutching one, probably hoping it's more effective than that dung amulet from earlier, but it wasn't all whimsy. Bad star alignments could derail marriages. You hear about a noble wedding cancelled because a comet appeared, taken as a divine warning. The bride's family, furious, demanded their dowry back, minus the pickled fish, of course. The church was skeptical too, preaching that trusting stars over God was borderline heresy, yet even priests sneaked peeks at almanacs. You notice a monk nearby pretending to pray but clearly eyeing the astrologer's charts. You shake your head, amused at how even the pious couldn't resist a cosmic cheat sheet. As you wander away from the tower, the astrologer calls out, offering to read your love stars for a penny. You decline, but the night sky feels alive, whispering secrets to those desperate for love. You head back toward the village, curious about the lingering superstitions that shape these starry-eyed romances. You're back in the medieval village, the night now deep and quiet, with only the crackle of distant fires and the soft hoot of an owl breaking the stillness. You're about to unravel the quirky superstitions and myths that wrapped medieval romance in a haze of magic and mystery, shaping how lovers chased their hearts under a world ruled by omens. The mainstream fact is that superstition permeated medieval life, with beliefs in charms, curses, and rituals influencing everything from courtship to marriage, often blending pagan and Christian traditions. The quirky tidbit? Some couples buried a pair of intertwined twigs under their doorstep to bind their love forever, though digging in the dirt probably just annoyed the neighbors. Historians still argue whether these practices were heartfelt faith or just ways to cope with the uncertainty of love in a harsh world. You're standing by a moonlit stream where a young woman tosses a pebble inscribed with her lover's name, whispering a charm to keep him faithful. You can't help but smile. Imagine texting "Stay true" to a rock instead of your partner. The belief was that water carried the spell to the heavens, but you're betting it just spooked the fish. Superstitions like this were everywhere. Lovers avoided crossing bridges at dusk, fearing spirits might curse their bond. You recall that turnip-rubbing trick from the barn dance, now paired with tales of tying ribbons to trees for luck in love. You chuckle, picturing a forest looking like a medieval Pinterest board gone wild. Some myths were darker. You overhear a villager warn that dreaming of your beloved on a Friday meant they'd betray you. You laugh softly, wondering how many relationships ended over a bad night's sleep. Another belief held that a woman who stepped on a crack in the church floor would never marry. You spot a girl carefully tiptoeing during a wedding procession, and you're torn between admiration and amusement. Then there's the bizarre idea that a sneeze during a proposal was a sign of divine approval, unless it was during Lent, when it meant doom. You shake your head, imagining a groom holding in a sneeze like his life depends on it. These superstitions weren't just quirks, they gave people a sense of control in a world where love was tangled with survival. You hear about a couple who planted a rosebush together, believing it would bloom as long as their love lasted. It's sweet, even if the bush probably outlived their marriage. The church tried to stamp out pagan holdovers, but villagers clung to their twig-burying and pebble-tossing, weaving them into prayers. You admire their stubborn hope, crafting magic from mud and moonlight. As the village fades into the night, you feel the weight of their world soften. The stars above seem to whisper, carrying those ancient hopes into the dark. You're lying in your own bed now, the hum of a fan blending with the echo of medieval dreams. The frantic chase for love, through dung charms, starry charts, and knotted chords, slips away, leaving only a gentle calm. Let the village rest, its lovers tucked into their tales of magic and mishaps. Your eyes grow heavy, the world blurring into a soft haze. Drift off now, wrapped in the quiet of centuries past, where love was wild, weird, and wonderfully human. Sweet dreams.